Hey everybody, welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be talking about after the tilt, and we're going to be looking at some of these leaning towers primarily in Russia, and there's some really interesting technologies associated with some of these, so it should be really interesting. And also we're going to touch on a topic called target practice, and you'll see why it should be interesting. Let's get into it. Now, just like in a lot of places around the world, there actually are quite a few leaning towers, and Russia is no exception. And this is one of the many leaning towers in Russia, and you can find a lot of them spread throughout the country. And this is another one here, and this is a really impressive structure. But there's one that's coming up that just really challenges the mainstream narrative, and it is very impressive. But before we get to it, this is another one, Russian Tower of Pisa in Kazan. And you can see it's got a bit of a tilt. But the thing with this tower is that they actually wonder what it was built for. And they question, why is it leaning? So they don't really know why it's leaning. And unfortunately, the local archives have been lost. So nobody knows when and why the tower is built. And that's a pretty common theme, unfortunately. But the main attraction of these leaning towers, in my opinion, is this Nevyansk Tower, well within the borders of Russia. And I have mentioned this a long time ago, this particular leaning tower, but I came across a lot of new information, to me anyway, and it just really challenges the mainstream narrative. And just for starters, I should mention, just like a lot of these towers, the exact date of construction unknown, as well as the actual purpose of the tower, it's debated, and even the fact that there is no information about the architect. So again, a lot of mystery. But when you start looking at the technology that's associated with this leaning tower, things get really crazy. Because the first thing I want to point out, and I was aware of this particular fact, but I just want to repeat it just in case you're not aware. There is what appears to be a lightning rod at the top of this tower. And even though they don't know the exact date of this tower, they believe it was built sometime in the 1720s, maybe even early 1730s. So it turns out that this tower, it's topped with a metal spire that connects to metal within the building structure, grounding what might be considered the first known lightning rod. And why this is all very interesting is because, of course, the lightning rod, we're told, was invented by Benjamin Franklin in 1752. And you might see some dates where it was conceived of in 1749. But a lightning rod is showing up that's grounded, connected with metalwork running throughout the structure. It's showing up in, the interior of Russia, of all places, in the 1730s, even if you take that date they're giving us. So before the invention of the lightning rod, it's already in use over a decade before, well within the borders of Russia. So that was very interesting. But I've come across some more details about this particular leaning tower and some more firsts. So turns out that the inner part of the tented roof associated with this structure, it is the first cast iron dome in history. And this is an achievement because it's not until approximately 100 years later that you see the use of a cast iron dome again in the restoration of this German cathedral. Again, just something else way ahead of its time. And then I came across this information. The Nevyansk Tower is considered the first known building to use reinforced concrete as a construction method, with deep metal bars, rebar, reinforced bar, forming its framework in the 1700s. This construction technique predates the first recorded use of reinforced concrete by over 130 years. So if you look up the first use of reinforced concrete, you're going to find some examples from, I believe, Paris in like the 1850s. But here we have it in the 1720s and 30s. So again, we're talking about all this technology ahead of its time, with the lightning rod, first cast iron dome, and the use of reinforced concrete over a century before we're told it's first being used. And that doesn't seem to be the case. So this structure is quite the narrative buster in my opinion. And another thing that I found really interesting is a lot of these towers are constructed in phases, like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, several phases of construction. But this one in particular caught my attention because the second phase, it was in the Renaissance style apparently. And this snippet from this article, I thought it was very interesting because it says, to this day, it's still unclear why the second phase was constructed. As you can see from the photo above, the lean in the Leaning Tower of Nevyansk comes from subsidence in the first phase. So they tried to build the second phase more vertically from the tower below. But it's in this Renaissance style. And if you don't know, the Renaissance style attempts to draw from classical Rome and Greece. And it just so happens, in my opinion, it looks a lot like the neoclassical style. So generally we're told the Renaissance style, even though it's following a lot of the same construction principles and design features that you'll associate with Rome and Greek structures, the columns, the triangular pediments, the domes, it's usually dated to an earlier time period. And neoclassical architecture follows a lot of those same principles and design elements, but that's usually given a later time period. And where I'm going with this is this cathedral that's right next to the tower, we're told it was built in the 1820s, basically. While this tower, we're told both its phases were in the 1720s and 30s, we're told. What I'm wondering is if this second phase that we're seeing, that was in this Renaissance style, which happens to be very similar to the neoclassical style. I'm wondering if the second phase was constructed at roughly the same time as this cathedral. And whatever the first phase of the construction, I believe that the lean on a lot of these towers was affected because of a destructive event. And I think that the people that came later and built a lot of the neoclassical architecture, Renaissance style architecture, came in after that destruction. So again, just an interesting element. I didn't know the second phase was in this neoclassical or Renaissance style. So I just wanted to point that out. So very interesting. Now, I want to briefly touch on a subject I call target practice, because I came across some archaeological sites that feature some interesting phenomena. And I want to touch on this particular site, Coles Hill Manor, I believe it's called. And archaeologists uncover one of the first battle sites from the English Civil War, which we're told was in the mid-1600s. And they believe this is what this manor may have looked like. And these two towers, there's not much left of them. Yeah, these are what's basically left of these towers. But there's some interesting phenomena associated with some of the stone, and it features these pockmarks. And they believe that these were caused by people using it for target practice, which again, very possible, makes sense. But when I'm looking at this, it seems like the areas that have the greatest concentration of these pockmarks, they seem to be affected, basically. Like, they seem to look a bit different from a lot of the other stones surrounding it. And where I'm going with this is, I think another destructive event may have actually caused the destruction of this manor. And that destructive event may also have had an effect on brick, stone, causing certain effects, what maybe a lot of people might call meltology. So that's what I'm wondering, if this pockmark effect, maybe it's not target practice, and maybe it's this, whatever this destructive event was. And I think there's been two, one that took out what we call the Roman Empire, and one that I associate with this, for lack of a better term, I'm just calling it colonial apocalypse. So again, it's an opinion, and why this stuck out to me is because there's another structure in St. Augustine, Florida, the Castillo de San Marcos, which, even though I don't trust the dates, it is linked to the Spanish colonial period and this colonial architecture, and they're given us dates of the 1600s, but it features a really interesting type of sandstone, I believe, called coquina, which has this extraordinary ability to absorb impacting projectiles. So soldiers would use the fort walls for target practice. And again, that probably is what's going on. And this is just a sample of some of these holes in the fort's walls. What I'm wondering is maybe, just maybe, this structure went through this colonial apocalypse I'm talking about, and a lot of what we're calling coquina was actually created during this event. And maybe parts of this fort were affected and it was transformed in certain ways. Again, it's a stretch, but I do think there's something more to all this. So I just wanted to point it out. And I was just searching online and I came across this Facebook post, somebody talking about these pockmarks associated with this homestead. And they are just saying that they don't think they are old bullet marks, but what tool would have made them? Definitely man-made in their opinion. And I just wanted to kind of show it. But again, looking very weathered, looking like it may trace back to the same colonial period, maybe. So I just wanted to point out some of these examples and just something I'm tracking and I thought was interesting. So I think that's about all I got for you for today. I do want to give a big shout out to my channel members. Thank you for all your help and support. Greatly appreciated. As well as my patrons, thank you for all your help and support as well. It's also greatly appreciated. So with that being said, until next time, take care. Bye.